All right, so we're looking at input lag on the LG C2 here. We've got it in game optimizer mode with the standard input lag setting. You can see we've got about 9.3 milliseconds of lag, which is really good in my opinion. You can actually get it to go lower, but I think this is just fine. But the issue that we have is that if we go to set the aspect ratio to 4:3, which you need for some retro gaming applications, especially if you're outputting, say, 1920 by 1440, the input lag immediately goes up almost 3 times, which is insane, absolutely crazy. And the just scan option is grayed out while in game optimizer mode for some reason. But unfortunately, even if you say original resolution, it's still going to add that lag if it's receiving a 4:3 flag from the device. Which right now we're just doing 1080p. Very normal resolution. This 9.3 is the milliseconds is the lag that you can expect from 60 hertz, regardless of input. Unless you're doing 480i, of course, but I would not recommend sending unfiltered 480i to a modern TV anyway. If we set it to boost mode, I don't really know that much about the specifics of what this does. But oh man, look at that. It's like 2 milliseconds. It's super fast. There are actually glitches in boost mode that exist in the C1 as well. Particularly for 480p, boost mode 480p lag is much higher than not boost mode for some reason. And there's a persistent screen tear when using boost mode at 720p. The fact that those issues have not been fixed from the C1 kind of makes me paranoid about whether this 4:3 issue will be solved. In fact, now that we're in boost mode, let's go back to change the aspect ratio again to 4:3. Boom, look at that. Look at that, that's more than 3 times higher. Like that's, like there's just no excuse for this. I checked on my C7. Aspect ratio does not change the input lag readings on there, which is on average 17 to 18 milliseconds, about no matter what signal you send it, which is fine, I think. This is by no means an unplayable amount of lag. But the problem is, if you're using 4:3 content, especially through an upscaler or the Mister or something, you're probably very likely going to want to use black frame insertion. And if you go to the game optimizer, you can't use black frame insertion while using boost mode. So we'll turn that back to standard. And then we go up here to OLED motion, which is black frame insertion. Makes the picture a little darker, but it makes the motion smoother. Not quite as, or not smoother, sharper. It makes it sharper, closer to a CRT. My understanding is that the CX is still king in terms of getting that, basically perfect motion clarity. This is not perfect motion clarity, but as you can see, black frame insertion as it is already brings it up to, 25 to 26 milliseconds. And, if you're going to change that aspect ratio, say you were using a RetroTink 5X at 1920 by 1440 or a Mister with 1920 by 1440, and you're using a 4:3 aspect ratio, boom, that's that's getting into, I don't know if I would quite say unplayable territory, but you would not want to. You would not be having as good of a time as you could be having at 42 milliseconds. I would say most people in the retro community would call that unplayable. I'm a little more tolerant, but this is not acceptable. This is not acceptable. And just to show that this is not simply an issue of changing it in the LG menu here, let me show you something right here. All right, so now we've switched over to looking at the RetroTink 5X with 1920 by 1440. This is an aspect ratio that is going to need to be displayed at 4:3 on the TV. It's one of the best things in retro gaming right now. You can use it on the Mister, you can use it on the RetroTink 5X. It's becoming a really important resolution, and the fact that this TV, that actually the past 3 years of LG TVs have accepted, is one of the main reasons I wanted to get this TV. Now you can see here we've got over 12 milliseconds. This chain running the time sleuth through a HDMI to component converter into the RetroTink 5X, that adds about 3 milliseconds of lag. So this is very similar to the 9 or so milliseconds we saw on the standard mode before. Just keep that in mind. This essentially 1920 by 1440 is not any laggier than the other situations we looked at before, which was just feeding it straight up 1080p. So, all right, we see this. We're in game optimizer mode. Everything is good, probably, you would think. But again, you want this mode to be in 4:3. So we changed the aspect ratio to 4:3. I mean, this is the crucial one. And, you know, there we go. Same situation. This is very similar to that 25-26 that we saw before, just with that 3 extra milliseconds added because of the way I have to route the time sleuth to test 1920 by 1440. But you might say, well, what if the TV saw that the native aspect ratio of this signal was 4:3? What if, you know, right now it thinks it's 16:9? Aha, you're right. So if I use the RetroTink remote, I can go to the HDMI here. You can see we're on frame lock mode, which means we're adding basically 0 lag. Close enough, near enough. But then we go down to the AV Info AR. You know, I'm no expert on how devices flag the signal to say, hey, I'm this, hey, I'm that. But right now it's saying it's 16:9. Not the case. Obviously, if you were sending a 1080p signal from the RetroTink, the pillar boxes are built into that full 1920 by 1080 frame. Not so when using 1920 by 1440. It's up to the display to have the ability to display that at that 4:3 aspect ratio, which not all TVs and monitors can do. Luckily we can do that here, but it adds a lot of lag. So let's say, hey, let's have the RetroTink tell the C2 that actually this is a 4:3 signal. Immediately switches. There's like not even a blip. I don't even think the frame goes black for a second, but then you can see this is just the craziest thing to me. 16:9 is telling the C2, hey, I'm the 16:9 signal. It's like, all right, I'll stretch you out, even though you're a 4:3. And then we switch it to 4:3, and it's like, oops, I gotta squish it, even though it doesn't have to squish you. If anything, displaying its native aspect ratio should require no processes. This should be free. And yet it's adding just as much lag as squishing 1080p to 4:3. Oh, and I know you're going to ask, did you set it to PC mode? Yes, I set the input to be named PC with the PC icon. It happens, it's the exact same lag readings when using 4:3. Regardless of whether it's called PC, game console, just regular HDMI input, you know, I've tried all of those. You know, you would think PC mode, oh, well, it should just display it without stretching it. You know, just take the input it receives. Nope, you only get the lowest lag if it's 16:9. It doesn't matter. And you might also say, well, why not just use the full widescreen 2560 by 1440 mode in the experimental RetroTink 5X firmware? Well, yeah, that is a possibility, maybe. I have seen Super Nintendo drop several times while using that mode. I don't know if that's the instability of the widescreen mode on here, or if it's just Super Nintendo. I haven't tried PS3, which I think is the most interesting use case for the 2560 by 1440 output mode. I suspect PS3 would probably be okay, but regardless, you can't use 2560 by 1440 on like the Mister. So you're stuck with 1920 by 1440 is your Best option to use on this TV with Mr. That 15 whatever iPad mode, totally screwed up on here. Very screwed up. Like the frames are all over the place. It's weird. So yeah, you would have to use 4.3 on this TV with Mr., which is going to add a ton of lag. So you would have, I mean, the only way you can really get around this is use 1080p, which, you know, that's not really an upgrade at all. My C7 could accept 1080p from all this stuff, but it couldn't do 1440p at all. That was the appeal of, you know, CX and C1. I hear do these modes, but I want confirmation. I need people to help me figure out, look, oh no, Luigi just died, that's all. It's just that I need people to help me figure out whether 1920 by 1440, yes, it accepts it just fine, it's stable, but does 4.3 increase input lag on the CX and C1? I don't know if people have thoroughly, look, that time it actually did drop. See it? You saw it? It happens. This happens. This 2560 by 1440, at least with Super Nintendo, not going to be stable on this TV. So we really need this 1920 by 1440 working. We need it working without lag.